Welcome to For the Love of Books, a podcast by North Lanarkshire Libraries.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the North Lanarkshire Libraries podcast For the Love of Books. My name is Chris Wilson, the E-Services Librarian, and this week on the podcast we've got a couple of things for you this week. And the first thing is, and we have got an interview with the author Lesley Kelly. Lesley is from Edinburgh, and she is probably best known for her books kind of about a pandemic called the Health of Strangers series. And she has got a new book coming out in July. So she's coming to tell us a little bit about that series, a little bit about her background, and also a little bit about the new book coming out as well. So listen up for that and you'll find out all about that. It's a fantastic series, and anyone who is into that kind of genre, it's a great writer to get into, and it's just a fantastic series to enjoy. And then after that, we're going to be introducing a new little feature, which we're going to introduce as a kind of, how we'll describe it, a sort of mini podcast all to itself within our normal podcast. So we're going to have something that we have titled Bees Books, and I'll let the people involved in that kind of tell you a little bit why it's called Bees Books themselves. But basically, there is Jennie and Pari, who has been recently on the podcast in the last few episodes, doing a little bit themselves and telling us a little bit about some book recommendations, and they can tell you all about it at the end. And you can look forward to seeing Bees Books in between the normal episodes that we release for the podcast going forward for the next little while as well. So that's something for you to enjoy. But for now, first up, we have got a little interview with Lesley Kelly, and you'll find out all about her series, The Health of Strangers. So thanks for joining me, Lesley. I thought we'd start off with getting to know you a little bit more before we get onto the books and stuff like that. And I saw on your website that you dabbled a little bit in stand-up comedy. So is that something that you still do a little bit of?
No, that was in my early 30s. I did that. I'd always been a big fan of stand-up comedy, but I hadn't really given much thought to how you become a stand-up comedian. And then I worked beside somebody that did stand-up comedy in his spare time. And basically, if you want to do stand-up comedy, you just phone up. It was the Stand that in Edinburgh. You kind of phone them up and say that you'd want to do it, and they let you, which must be just about the only art form that you don't need any qualifications or previous training. You just stand up and do it. So I did it for a while in my early 30s, and it's great. I think it's a great preparation for life, because there's no meeting at work that's quite as terrifying as having to stand up in front of a bunch of drunk Glaswegians and try to make them laugh, particularly when you come from Edinburgh.
Yes, definitely. I could imagine that could be quite. But you must feel quite in the spotlight whenever you get on stage and you're kind of standing there and having to kind of try and, like say, make people giggle all the way through for 20 minutes or so at a time.
Yeah. Audiences at sort of book events are much politer. You don't get the heckling or anything like that. So it was a good preparation for writing books and promoting books, I think.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what came first, the comedy or the books, or was it the comedy that you kind of tried first?
They came actually, surprisingly, at exactly the same time, because Leith Festival, which is like a little community festival near to where I live, they had a week-long event, and one of the things they did was they organised a short story competition, and they also did a kind of introduction to stand-up comedy. So I entered the short story competition and won it, and then had the celebration for that. And then the very next night I was back doing my debut stand-up comedy after, I think there was 5 of us very, very nervously doing our debut as part of the Leith Festival in a room that was entirely made up of our friends and family. So, it was the best reception you're ever going to get for any events. But yes, so God bless Leith Festival. And I think it shows, quite what an impact these little community festivals make on people's lives, that, you can do all that in 1 week.
Yeah, they can be and they're a great kind of place for people to kind of start off with and things like that, and get kind of involved in these things as well, like you say. And you've also worked a lot in kind of public and voluntary sector and things like that as well, haven't you, for quite a long time?
Yeah, I'm getting old now, so I hate to think how long it is. It's probably about 30 years now that I've been in various bits of the public sector and voluntary sector. And really that's where my inspiration came for the novels that we're going to go on and talk about the health of strangers. And the role that I've been in for about the past 20 years is working for something called a third sector interface, which is a kind of umbrella body for all the charities and third sector organisations in a local area. And we spend an awful lot of our time sitting in meetings, community planning meetings. You've got the police there and the council and the health service. And they've all got like very different cultures. You know, the police have got that real dark humour thing going on. And, you know, some of the health bits of the health service are quite right on. And you know, I just thought that was really interesting. And, you know, one of the things that we sit in these meetings and discuss is emergency planning. You know, what would happen if the weather was really, really bad and people were getting snowed in, and then we had the beast from the east, you know, remember that back in 2010, the terrible, terrible weather we had.
I think everybody remembers the beast from the east.
Everyone's digging themselves out of their house, yeah. And one of the other things that we plan for, obviously, was things like pandemics. But the pandemic that we were preparing for was obviously flu. We just kind of thought, well, one year, you know, we're bound to get a really bad flu epidemic, and what do we do if we've got lots of people off sick? But little did we know that we hadn't quite prepared for the right thing. But yes, that was the kind of inspiration for all this. And the other kind of sort of inspiration for it was that quite often when you're watching sort of TV dramas, I think the way that people in the public sector are portrayed is quite stereotypical. You know, you always get an evil sort of housing officer and things like that, and thinking, well, they're not really like that. You know, there's an awful lot of nice people that work in the public sector as well, and hate the conditions that they're under and the shortages and the lack of funding to do anything. So I kind of wanted to do something written from the perspective of frontline emergency responders who were dealing with a pandemic.
Yeah, no. So that gives you, that must have gave you such a great kind of background to kind of start off with with the novels that you have ended up writing. But funny enough, the first novel you wrote wasn't a kind of post-pandemic type novel. It was your book, A Fine House in Trinity, and the post-pandemic sort of stuff is the sort of stuff you're probably best well known for. I would say. And that novel was nominated for quite a prestigious prize, wasn't it? If I can get my teeth in to say that properly, William McIlvanney Prize. And that was quite a kind of nice moment to kind of get nominated for that and kind of feel like you're on the right path with writing and stuff like that for getting nominated for that.
It was lovely. I don't think I fully understood what it was that I'd been nominated for, because your press goes away and does all this on your behalf. But I was absolutely delighted, and you know, it was my first novel. There was a lot of sort of autobiographical stuff in that, so it was absolutely lovely to be, you know, get some kind of recognition for that particular novel. And it's set in the area of Edinburgh that I live in, Trinity, which is full with it's got lots of big old houses. And we're down on the shoreline, so a lot of these houses, when they were built to do with the shipping industry, and quite a lot of them have little turrets where the ship owner could retreat to and watch their ships coming into the harbour. But also in these parts, there's always been quite a history of things like smuggling and things like that. Oh. And a lot of these buildings had like sort of hidden rooms that you wouldn't know they were there. This was where people were stashing their hooch that they were keeping away from the customs. So, you know, just kind of walking past all these houses, really kind of inspirational for a writer. And all my family's from Leith, which again, quite a sort of contrasting area. So, you know, the story was about this minor criminal from Leith inheriting one of these great big houses and then finding out somebody wants to kill him for it. So it's a huge amount of fun to write. And it did, I mean, the guy in it, there was lots of flashbacks in it, and he's more or less the same age as me. So there were lots of flashbacks to like 1980s Leith and things that I remembered really well. So it was a lot of fun to write.
Yeah, so that kind of having that personal link to the area and knowing it so well must have kind of been quite helpful when it comes to actually writing it and kind of making it quite realistic for the reader. I thought.
Yeah, and it did end up being like almost famous within a very, very small postcode area, because Trinity's quite a sort of sleepy area and not a lot happens in the way of crime. So having a crime novel set here, it sold really, really well locally. So yes, I'm famous within the EH5 postcode. Just the rest of the world to conquer now.
And you're slowly doing that, I think, with your series, the Health of Strangers, and so that was the kind of that series was the follow up to that first novel, and the first one is called The Health of Strangers, and it's set in Edinburgh again on the backdrop of a virus spreading throughout the country. The government's kind of set mandatory health checks, and fast forward a couple of years from when you've written that, we were stuck in the middle of COVID, and it must have almost felt as if you were actually living your novel a little bit, I think, for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I was incredibly well prepared at work for a pandemic because I'd been thinking about this for years. Well, what would the government do and how would we respond? And I got quite a lot of it right. Things like in my books, you've got a green card that you need to be able to do certain things. And, we're talking about vaccine passports when they came in.
Yeah.
So got quite a lot of it right, but didn't in my wildest dreams think of anything like furlough, the idea that we would be paid to stay at home and not go to work.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody had until that actually happened. So it was a lot of fun imagining all this when I was doing it and when it was just like complete fiction. But a lot scarier when it actually started coming true. And did get quite a lot of people like contact me on Twitter and things saying, well, basically you're a witch or something. How did you know this was all going to happen? And
that's the thing. Yeah, I mean, there's so many kind of sort of pandemic novel type things out there, and naturally, whenever you read them, they kind of if you don't read them thinking that they actually probably would occur, but then we've all experienced that just in the last few years. It's so strange to kind of think that kind of thing did actually, that thing that writers probably all thought this is just a dead good story to write actually can really occur, and it did occur.
I always had a bit of a problem with mainly Hollywood blockbusters and more than novels, but where a virus strikes and, within weeks you're down to a handful of survivors and things, because I was thinking, well, actually, we do plan for things like pandemics. The NHS have all these kind of plans, so it wouldn't be like that. And what we would do is we would actually manage it, and it would be a kind of managed apocalypse. And then it hit, and that was exactly what we did. And people might not have liked it. And there's certainly a lot of discussion in my books about civil liberties and how people felt about having their, liberties restrained because of the pandemics, which certainly we saw those discussions taking place. And in my books, there's also a lot of corrupt politicians, but I won't go into detail about whether that happened in real life. I'll leave that to people to make their own minds up about what happened there.
Yeah, there was certainly a lot to discuss on that topic, I'm sure, and has been in the past. And the series that you have written about, as I say, is kind of set on a kind of pandemic background, and it focuses on a team that was set up called the Health Enforcement Team, who are primarily set up to kind of try and help with the health checks and stuff that's mentioned in it. But in reality, they kind of get involved in much more, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Sort of quite early in the first book, one of the team members, Mona, kind of twigs to the idea that they're supposed to be the North Edinburgh Health Enforcement Team, but they seem to be working all over the place. And she has a conversation with her boss, who says, what are the things you're not supposed to talk about at dinner parties? And obviously it's sex, politics and religion. And he says anything that's to do with any of these things comes to our team. And she kind of asks him, why would that be? And if you think about it, the people that are in the health enforcement team are either seconded from the NHS or from the police. And it's kind of a post that nobody actually wants, because they think, well, if you end up being seconded into this, it's all going to have blown over in a few months. And it's just kind of, it's just derailed your career for no reason. So everybody that ends up in the health enforcement team is there because they've blotted their copybook in some way. It's a bit like, as Craggy Island is for priests, so the health enforcement team is for police officers. So basically most of the hets are completely incompetent. And this slightly incompetent bunch of people is actually the best that they've got. So they tend to get anything that's to do with politics. Partly just as a plot device, because I quite like writing about all the political intrigue. so the books do tend to focus around this evil politician called Carlotta Carmichael, who's head of the Scottish Parliament's Virus Committee. I had a lot of fun with that and thinking about what politicians might be getting up to behind the scenes.
and two of the main characters, one of them you mentioned there, Mona, and Bernard, are two of my favourite characters, I think, in the book. Mona in particular, because she's quite very career driven, and she's not averse to taking a few risks to try and kind of reach kind of further on, and thinking beyond the Het team a little bit, I think, isn't she?
Yeah, I mean, people are definitely either Team Mona or Team Bernard. I think they both have good points, and I wouldn't really want to work in an office beside either of them because they've also got quite a lot of annoying traits. But it was quite interesting to have Mona being the sort of police officer. So she's, quite confident in a fight and things like that. And Bernard was a health promotion officer who's never hit anybody in his life. And this has been kind of sold to them, this project that is going to be really about people's health. But it's not, because it's about people turning up for a monthly health check. And if they don't turn up, the health enforcement team come round and get you. So they're basically going around and knocking on the doors of people who have, drug or alcohol issues or whatever that's meant that they missed it. And they tend to try and punch them quite a lot when they do that. So Bernard in the early books just spends all of his time being terrified and kind of hiding behind Mona. But he's getting a bit more confident as the books go on. And they're also getting a bit more corrupted. They were both, the one thing they had in common is that they were both very, very clean. There was no chance of them lying or anything like that on behalf of the job. But as the books go on, that's changing a bit. Mona's getting, increasingly interested in getting promoted, and Bernard's getting increasingly kind of scared for his life. So they're both starting to do naughty things.
Yeah, for sure. And one of my favourite things as well about the Het team in general is their personalities that were within it. There's all kind of very relatable in terms of, I think there's probably people. Everyone will know somebody similar to one of the characters. I think the voices are quite recognisable, I think, in some way for the readers, I think.
Yeah, all my colleagues come along to my book launches just to find out exactly who's in the book and speculate who it's based on. But no, they're all figments of my imagination. There's a little bit of me in all of the different characters.
And the last book in the series so far, it was called Murder at the Music Factory. And it saw the Het team become kind of targets from a bit of a crazed former colleague. The team discover a lot of interesting people as they're going through that, and both trying to kind of survive and find that former colleague before he finds them. And one of the characters that I really loved in it was the IT guy in it, Marcus, because he becomes quite an important part in it with his knowledge of the fictional progressive rock band Arthusian Fall in it. And was there any inspiration behind them or Marcus as a character? Because I'm pretty sure I know plenty of guys like Marcus. I'm a big kind of music fan myself, and I'm pretty sure I know lots of folk who really know the ins and outs of lots of bands and stuff like that other folk are completely not interested in.
Yeah, no, I mean, the inspiration for Arthusian Fall came from watching, I think it was called Prog Rock Britannia. There's a series of different music things called Britannia, and they did one on prog rock, and it was hilarious. I mean, I do like prog rock. I'm a big Pink Floyd fan and like things like early Queen and all that. So I did like the music, but some of the outer or reaches of it were quite strange. And listening to this person being interviewed on the Prog Rock Britannia show, and he was saying there were no women ever at anybody's concerts. And they've kind of been taken on by this record company because obviously, yes, we're shifting loads and loads of records and Pink Floyd and things. I'm thinking, yeah, what we need is more prog rock. And then the record companies having no understanding of what people liked or didn't like. So they were just making music that was increasingly unlistenable, and the record companies were putting it out because they didn't know any better. And things like Gong and Egg and that were really kind of outrageous in their music. So that was the kind of inspiration for it. And I thought it'd just be really funny to have a rock band with some really unlistenable music. And of course, I love Marcus to death, and he just loves it all. and he loves the whole thing. You know, I think prog rock is really of its time because it's much of it about the music. It's about like the gatefold sleeve on the album, you know, where it has the sort of, you know, the Yes picture or whatever in the middle of it. And just, you know, the whole story being influenced by that.
Yeah,
I do have a lot of fun writing all these books.
yeah. Well, one of the parts of the book that I kind of, it's a sort of probably not a major part in terms of story, but it was just one of the parts. I think it's Bernard he sees a symbol somewhere, and he's like, well, I recognise that from somewhere, and it turns out to be Marcus' T-shirt, which is just not as it's a great thing because he's wearing an Enthusiasm Falls T-shirt. And I just thought that was a lovely wee kind of moment. And like I say, it's not really probably not that important from the actual story point of view, but it's just just a kind of great little thing. Now, you're no stranger to North Lanarkshire we're from, North Lanarkshire Libraries. You did, a good few years ago, do a book event for us at Summerley Museum for the launch of your book, Death in the Plague Museum. Was that a bit different doing a sort of author event in museums rather than in a library or bookshop, which probably I'd imagine you would more regularly do?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm all in favour of, you know, book events and museums. I absolutely love museums. And my family's quite into museums as well, apart from my older son, because we went on holiday to London and we did 7 museums in the time we were down there, and he's never coming on holiday with us again. But it was just so much fun inventing a museum for Death at the Plague Museum. And I think it's a museum that we're missing, really. There isn't actually a museum of plagues and pandemics in Scotland. And I think, you know, interest in it being a bit higher now, maybe there will be one day. But it was a lot of fun sort of making that up and coming up with what exhibits you would have in such a museum. And I put it in one of these old sort of Georgian houses that has this sort of spiral, but the kind of metal staircase that goes all the way up, and had somebody fall from the top of that onto a model of, you know, virus DNA, and thought like lots of the other exhibits that would be in there, basically just stealing from all the other museums that we have in Edinburgh. You know, kind of a monkey from there, and you know, I'll have a few chickens from somewhere else because they're all responsible for viruses across the world. So that was hugely fun, making up a museum. But yeah, I do like a bit of industrial museum life, so definitely very much enjoyed my trip to Summerley.
Yeah, I did notice. I think I'm right to think there's a bit on your website about museums and stuff like that listed there, and kind of a few recommendations to visit and things.
Yeah, absolutely. It links people into the different kind of exhibits. Yeah, and there were some natural history ones, and there's also sort of the social history stuff as well. And the National Library of Scotland is in Edinburgh. It kind of links to that, which had lots of stuff, you know, sort of materials relating to my particular pandemic is based on the Spanish flu outbreak. So there's lots of stuff about Spanish flu that you can go and sort of read up on.
Yeah, and so if any of our listeners want to find out a little bit more, they can go on your website and have a look through some of the things that maybe influenced a little bit that story. And you do have a new book in the series coming out in July this year, Dead Man Driving, and this sounds like it sounds like society's not really getting any better, really, to be honest. The society's kind of, there's food shortages happening, there's pandemic still going on, and the hit team are kind of challenged a little bit in this one with going to try and track down a missing food lorry. Is that right? Kind of, what else can they expect to kind of find out in the story? Is there anything we can kind of give away in it?
Yeah, I mean, this is, you know, I keep writing books and then they start coming true, you know, about pandemic, and then it happened. And when I was writing this book, so obviously a few years ago, I started writing it, I had Brexit on my mind, and I thought, oh, maybe Brexit will lead to food shortages. Hadn't thought at all about, well, nobody had predicted sort of the Ukraine situation and the rampant inflation that we would have. And, you know, I was wanting to illustrate in the book that prices had gone through the roof for foods because with so many people being ill, things weren't being picked in the fields and things. So I was thinking, well, what's a ridiculous amount of money to be spending on a sandwich? And I'm sort of putting it that, you know, you didn't get much change from a tenner buying a sandwich on the Royal Mile. And, with inflation going up, I was thinking, by the time this book comes out, yes, actually, it will cost £10 to have a sandwich on the Royal Mile.
You might need to edit that by the time it comes out.
I know. If it gets reprinted, we'll have to put up to £20 or something. But yeah, this is the evil politician, Carlotta Carmichael. Now, she's got all the virus ministers from across Europe together, and she's putting a ministerial dinner, and it's a bit awkward because you don't want to be spending too much money on food because taxpayers will get annoyed. On the other hand, you don't want to be seen as cheap by your colleagues. So she's got this lorry load of high-end food that's supposed to be driven through from Glasgow to Edinburgh for the meal. And then somewhere around Bell's Hill, they turn off the tracker for this lorry, and it just goes completely missing. And then when they finally track down the lorry, there's a dead body on it. And of course, the Het is involved in all this. It shouldn't be, but it is. Trying to track down who these people are and how the woman's ended up dead. So, yeah.
I love the fact that it goes missing somewhere in North Lanarkshire as well. That's fantastic.
Right. Fantastic. Yeah. So I don't know if any North Lanarkshire people were involved in hijacking this lorry, but...
We will keep tight-lipped on that one, I think. One of the things that I love about the books as well is something that's kind of slightly unrelated to the actual stories in a way, but related in a small way is the book covers and things like that. Like they're very simple, but also very kind of stand out-ish on the shelves and stuff. I think they do stand out really well. Did you have any input into that at all, or is that all kind of down to the publisher Sandstone Press, or?
It's down to the publishers. They actually came out with different covers for the first two books, and they were very similar to the Fine House and Trinity covers. But then as the story kind of developed, it was becoming less kind of crime novels and more sort of thrillers.
Yeah.
So the press decided to rebrand them all. But you're right, they're fabulous. They're kind of rainbow coloured, and they do look really, really good. I always just go along with them. I don't know if you can argue back with your press about what the cover should look like, but I tend to think they probably know more about selling books than I do. So if they think that this is what it takes to sell them, I'm willing to believe them.
Yeah, so you stick to write them, they stick to come up with the cover.
I do what I do, they do their bit. Yeah.
Good stuff. Now, obviously, your main series, as we've been talking about, is all about pandemic-related stories, and you've got another section on your website, as well as the museum part. You've also got a section on there about pandemic novels, and one of my favourite pandemic series is on there, the Playtime series by Louise Welsh, which is a fantastic set of books. If anyone hasn't read them, they really should go and check them out as well, after you've read Lesley's books, obviously. And do you have any other favourites that you would recommend to anyone who likes that sort of genre?
Yeah, I'd recommend a couple. I mean, we're starting to see books coming out that specifically reference COVID now. But a writer called Catherine Ryan Howard was very quick off the mark. And I think while going through COVID, wrote a novel called 56 Days, which is based about a couple kind of meeting each other. And because, COVID times were what they were, they move in together really quickly without actually knowing very much about each other. And one of them ends up dead. It's not really a spoiler. You sort of find that out quite quickly. So highly recommend that. That was a real page turner. But I think probably my favourite novel to do with pandemics is Station 11 by Hilary Mantell.
Yeah,
it's not Hilary Mantel, is it? It's Emily.
Emily St. John Mantell.
Yeah, Emily.
Yeah.
Which is just, it isn't a kind of apocalyptic one about a virus spreading across the world. But for a book about the apocalypse, it's incredibly kind of hopeful. Usually, you see like The Walking Dead, it's everybody's at everybody else's throats and trying to kill them. But this is kind of focusing on a band of people who go around playing music. So they go around all the different settlements and take an orchestra with them. And although bad things happen in the book, also shows that, civilization would continue, which has always been my thought, that knowledge, we have the knowledge now, and whatever happened, we'd take it with us.
Yeah, that's another fantastic novel, another one of my favourites. But I know you've got obviously the new book coming out very shortly, but I was thinking a little bit beyond that. Do you think there's going to be a few more of the Health of a Stranger books coming out? Is that pandemic over yet for you, or is that kind of still going on?
Yeah, I mean, there's a limit to how long you can tease out a series of novels about a pandemic. I mean, we all know how long they last now, and you can't write them forever. I would like to take it to some kind of conclusion, but to be honest, I think we need to wait and see how this novel's received, because it's the first of the series that's come out since we've had an actual pandemic.
Yeah.
And maybe people have had enough of reading about that kind of stuff.
It would be interesting to know if they're like in a kind of publishing sense, whether there has been a kind of uptake in reading that kind of fiction, or whether people have been lived it and actually don't want to read it or not. It'd be interesting to know the different, like what the stats on that would be. Interesting to see if the publishers, if there is. I mean, there's plenty of novels out there with it, and I think there is a kind of interest in the topic, I would say, from a library point of view, for sure. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see. So it's a bit of a watch this space as to whether there's any future ones and they come forward.
Definitely. I would like to take it to some kind of conclusion. As well as the sort of individual standalone bits of the story, there is a kind of story arc of what the pandemic's really all about and what's caused it and things. So I would like to see that through to its conclusion, but we'll see.
Yeah. And for anyone who is a huge fan of the Health of Stranger series, they might not have noticed this, there is also a short story available for it as well, isn't there?
Yeah. There's a little freebie short story just there for anybody that wants to put a toe in the water and see if this is their kind of thing. So again, that's also on my website. There's one of these little annoying pop-ups that comes up as soon as you go onto the site, so you can just download it from there and get to know a bit about Mona and Bernard from that.
Yeah, so fantastic. Thank you very much, Lesley, for coming and joining me and telling us all about your Health of Stranger series. And I hope that the new book launch goes really, really well. And I'm sure that our readers will want to get their hands on it whenever they can do. And your other books are available on our BorrowBox service. And so anyone who's interested can download BorrowBox and access the first four titles, is that right? The first 4 parts of the series, and kind of catch up before the new one comes out as well. So anyone can read that while they're waiting. But thank you, Lesley, for coming and joining me and talking to us on our podcast.
Thanks very much for inviting me.
So thank you very much, Lesley, for coming and joining and talking to me there. That was lovely to speak to you, and it was great to find out all about the kind of background behind the Health of Stranger series, and also find out a little bit about the new book, which features North Lanarkshire. Can you believe it? Somebody has stolen the truck in Bells Hill, of all places. And that is a great book to look forward to in the near future. Do try and check it out when you get a chance, once it comes out in July, and you will not be disappointed. And if you haven't read the other ones, as I said in the interview, they are available on BorrowBox for you guys to to read as ebooks. And you can read those on BorrowBox too. And they are available in our libraries as well, if you can manage to catch them on one of the shelves in there too. Next up, we have got our new section, which we have entitled Bees Books, and I'll leave Jennie and Pari from Coatbridge Library to tell you all about why it's called Bees Books, and you can look forward to more sections of Bees Books in the weeks between the normal podcast that we put out, and so that you can kind of get some good book recommendations from Jennie and Pari, and possibly others going forward if they can convince them to come and speak to them. And we'll let them tell you all about it now.
Hi, this is Pari.
And this is Jennie, and we're here to talk about Bee's Books.
So Jennie, tell us what Bee's Books is.
So Bee is our very fabulous bonsai tree, and for every 2 weeks when we do the podcast, she will be suggesting a theme for us to tackle, and our task is to find a couple of books that we think would fit into that in some way. It might not be a most obvious way, but we will find a way to squeeze something in. We'll have a chat about it, and you can listen to our ramblings on the podcast.
So this segment is basically just an excuse for Jennie and me to talk about the books that we love, and hopefully other people, we can recommend these books to other people as well, but mostly we're excited to recommend
Absolutely.
them to each other. So the theme, the first theme that Bea gave us is called Here Comes the Sun. We thought it's a good theme because summer is coming and, you know, the sun is hopefully coming. I don't know, it doesn't look very sunny the
Not
day we're
today.
recording, no. But we've been promised sunshine coming. But because I am always trying to find weird ways to make books fit into themes, I found a weird way to make my book fit into this theme. So my book for Here Comes the Sun is Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. What about you,
Excellent.
Jenny?
So my book is called The Dry, which is a kind of obvious way to get into Here Comes the Sun. But I have a sneaky backup as well that if we've got time we'll talk about later.
Absolutely.
So I see that you've come dressed today as one of your characters.
I don't need an excuse to dress up, as you know. So I've dressed up as a witch. In the book, her name is Anathema Device, I think. That's how you pronounce it. It's not a name that you come across regularly.
No, definitely not.
So first, let me ask you, Jenny, have you read this book?
Yes, I have.
Oh, excellent. So one of the things that we did in the run-up to this segment and this recording was we didn't tell each other what our books were because we were going to surprise each other with it. I thought that Jenny might know this book because we're both huge fantasy fans. I don't know her book, so I can't wait to hear about her book. But yes, I'm Anathema. And the reason that I think this book fits is because it's not about the literal sun, but it is about a literal sun. It's about the son of Satan and the Antichrist, who is, so the Antichrist has come into the world and it's the end of the world as we know it, Armageddon and the world, whatever. And I love the characters in the books. I'm dressed up as one. I love her. There's a witch finder, there's an angel, there's a demon, there's 4 horse persons of the apocalypse, and there's the Antichrist and his friends. The Antichrist is 11 years old, and I think that he's a pretty good Antichrist at what he does, which is being an 11-year-old boy, so not so much at being an Antichrist, because he doesn't know he's the Antichrist. And the angel and demon and the witch have sort of misplaced him, so they're all looking for him, and he's a bit lost. And that's what the book is about. What about you?
I really enjoy. I have to say that I have read this book, and I love Terry Pratchett. Terry Pratchett is just wonderful, and I think this book worked because Neil Gaiman is like slightly different than Terry Pratchett, and it kind of brings both of them in. Have you seen the TV series?
Yes. Okay. So I reread this book. I first read this book in 2015 when I didn't live in this country, and now I've reread it now that I'm here, and I started rewatching the season just in preparation for this episode. And the second season's coming out in July.
Yes.
So I'm like, it's preparing for that as well, and I love it. I love it so much. So that's why my outfit is like the actress in the TV show. So saying that, Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman, like you said, you love Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman's spooky horror kind of thing. This was my first introduction to both of them. Excellent. Like I'd heard about Discworld a lot, I'd heard about Neil Gaiman a lot, and I thought this was, a sort of good entry point. I thought this was much more Discworldy than, I felt it was much more Terry Pratchett than Neil Gaiman, except for the horror spooky bits, I guess, which I think they do say that he brings in the gross bits because they wrote it together. And I love how their minds work and how they look at the world and how they make you look at the world. So both of them in very different ways. Yes. So I love, this is one of my favorite books and I loved revisiting it.
This is good, and I like that you've managed to squash that into our first episode. Yeah. Because as you say, it's not the sunshine.
No,
it's the sun as in,
Although the angels and demons are both waiting for Armageddon and the apocalypse because they're fighting against each other and both teams are determined that they're going to win. So for them, it is sunshine summer in a metaphorical sense.
Yes.
So it works.
It does.
So now I can't wait to hear about your book, The Dry.
The Dry. So it's by Jane Harper and it's set in Australia. And basically it's set in a small town and it hasn't rained for 2 years. Okay. If it doesn't rain in Scotland for 2 days, we start to panic. So imagine living somewhere where it doesn't rain for 2 whole years. Okay, everybody is getting really on edge because there's no water, you can't feed your farm animals, so there's a lot going on behind the scenes. And basically during this, I'll read a wee bit about it. It says tensions in the community become unbearable when 3 members of the Hadley family are brutally murdered.
Oh.
So basically, a detective comes who used to live in this town and tries to discover what happened. What they think is that the father of the family killed the 2 and then killed himself, but Falk, the detective, isn't quite sure that's what happened. He knows the family from when he lived there before, and basically there's 2 stories going on. It's about him and his homecoming and why he left the town while trying to investigate this either suicide murder or triple murder. And it's just brilliant because throughout of it, there is no rain, it is just getting hotter and hotter and hotter. The sun is just blaring on everybody, and everybody's getting really quite anxious. They're getting, themselves quite worked up about the smallest thing.
Yeah.
So it's quite a page turner. It's kind of like, you want to find out what happens, and you also want it to rain, which, as I say in Scotland, we never say.
So that's really cool, because when you started describing it, I thought it was going to be like a climate crisis, sort of climate apocalypse kind of, sort of different kind of apocalypse story, but it's a murder mystery within that. So it's like I know a lot of people now are talking about or exploring as well the effect of the climate crisis in not just futuristic worlds but now as well, and in science fiction and fantasy especially, that they think that this should be a part of the narrative because that's what we're living currently. But this is interesting that it has like a murder maybe mystery element to it as well. I think that sounds great, and I love how we've both gone in very different directions with our sons. You're like, the son is trying to kill everybody, which actually in Good Omens the son might be trying to kill everybody.
Absolutely, as well. We're not going to tell you though.
No, we're not.
Read the book.
Yeah.
And also I'm not going to tell you what happens with this one.
No.
I'm not even going to tell you if it rains. You have to read it. But yeah.
It actually reminds me of a young adult book that I read. Of course, I don't remember the name at all, but it's by Neil Schusterman, and it's set in California, and there's these seasonal droughts that happen there, and the water in a community is turned off. So it's a different kind of it's not raining here, there's no rain, but there's no access to water as well, like drinking water or like just bathing water, whatever, and how the community turns into, so that's sort of like kind of horror. So it's like water zombies. And
water zombies.
Yeah.
You sold me with that.
Yeah, and it's how people can sort of like the best and the worst of humanity coming out at a time when you've lost access to a resource that you take so much for granted, whereas here it's like a resource that you need but not so much.
No, exactly.
So who would love this book, you think?
So if you like a right good page turner, if you like a thriller or a kind of detective story, it's great. It is good. How about you? Who do you think would like Good Omens?
I think people who are into funny books, who don't take themselves too seriously, and who would like to see, if you already know Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett, you might already have read this book. If you don't, this is a good introduction if you were curious about them, or if you're not, but you're sold by the idea of the Antichrist, or an angel and demon misplacing the Antichrist, or David Tennant and Michael Sheen,
who are brilliant.
Yeah, who play the devil and the angel respectively in the TV show. I think, I just think people who may not even be into fantasy so much, because even though it is fantasy, it's still, because it's such a huge part of the, I guess, Western cultural narrative framework, like Christian framework. So if you're just interested in that, but exploring a different way of how that goes.
Absolutely.
Because I also really enjoyed, I don't know if I should have enjoyed, the 4 horsepersons of the apocalypse. So that's war, pollution, death and famine. Yep. So I like, it's this whole cast of characters. There's a Scottish witchfinder as well, which it's interesting. So this is a digression from the question that you asked me, which I should have stuck to, but it's really interesting because I read this when I was in India, when I lived there, and I loved it then too. But rereading it now, I got a lot more of the cultural sort of context, you know, the insiderness, which as a cultural outsider, I didn't really.
Absolutely.
But now that I've lived here for 6-7 years now almost, you know, I knew what they were referencing without them having to explicitly reference it. So I would recommend it to you, yeah, if you know the culture, if you don't, if you're into stories of the Armageddon and like of the Antichrist and things. I just think it's a great fun read.
Yeah. And it's funny. I mean, it is.
It's
We've maybe
funny.
not stressed that enough,
No,
but
yeah.
it's very funny.
Yeah.
You will laugh out loud.
Possibly the funniest book about the end of the world.
Yes.
Maybe there's funnier. Recommend them to us.
To be fair, in the dry, you're not going to laugh very much,
No.
but you are going to make this noise. Ooh, quite a lot.
I might laugh at you if you make that noise. So, you know, there's room for comic entertainment. Who do you think wouldn't pick this up based on the cover that looks really a bit scary and like, you know, I don't know. It has a very sinister vibe to it.
It does. It is quite dark, the cover.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at first you might not realise what it's about
Yeah.
as such.
Yeah.
It is kind of a weird cover. How about your cover? I'm interested.
So my cover has Crowley, I think, just chilling. So the demon just chilling with a glass of wine. So it doesn't really say much about it, and good omens. But so I think, I don't know, it might give off a very different kind of vibe. Like, I don't know if it gives a super religious kind of vibe, but not with the devil. Yeah, I don't know who wouldn't like it. I think this book may not work for everyone, to be honest, because some people may not want the kind of treatment that it's giving.
No.
You know, they might not like that.
No.
Or the kind of humor that's in it. There's lots of footnotes, which I love.
I love the footnotes.
If you
as
know
well.
Discworld, you know, lots of footnotes as well. But I think this cover is very mysterious for people who are into a mystery kind of thing. But it is sort of a mystery. Where is the Antichrist? We don't know. Well, we know. They don't know. So
I quite like, though, that both our books, the covers do not really represent what's inside the book.
Mm-hmm.
So never judge a book by its cover.
Unless, so I did judge a book by its cover. This book, in fact, because the copy that we have in Coatbridge Library, which is where we're recording it from, has the TV show's poster as the cover. Mm-hmm. And again, like, I love the TV show. I just have a thing against books that have the TV shows or the movie posters as their cover. So I might have judged it a little bit.
Fair enough.
But you would still recommend it, like you would still recommend people give your book a shot.
Yes, and mine has also been made into a film as well, which I've not seen. I have not seen it because I like the book too much.
Oh yeah.
I don't want to see somebody else's version of it, if you see what I mean.
Saying that, I feel like the TV show, the Good Omens TV series really lived up to the thing. So I just, like I said, I started rewatching it while I was finishing the book. Mm-hmm. And this dialogue, the narrative, the narration, everything, I was like, oh wait, I just read this. So it was very close, I think. And I think that's because Neil Gaiman was very much a part of it.
Absolutely.
And even the second series, so this book is very much like a standalone book, like it can work as a standalone. Mm-hmm. But Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett had been talking about ideas for a second book, but they just never got around to it because they got wildly successful, so they didn't have the time. But I think that sort of captures the idea, so it's good to have the writer really close to the project. So yeah, maybe if Jane Harper had the time or the inclination.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Or maybe she did and you don't know.
Watch the film and find out. You can let us know. Can I tell you about my secret backup book, Carrie? Is that okay?
Yes.
So I went a little bit crazy with this one, and I have chosen Miss Benson's Beetle.
Oh.
Basically because Here Comes the Sun is a Beatles song, and I went around about the ways.
Love it.
Yeah. So I went quite literal with the dry, but Miss Benson's Beetle is a wee bit different.
Yeah.
It's by Rachel Joyce, and basically it's set in the 50s, and it's a lady who has decided that she's in a dead-end job, she wants to do something exciting, and she goes on the hunt for this beetle. This wee creepy crawly that she's been told about by her father many years ago, and basically she packs everything up and goes, and she advertises for a companion to go with her because it was the 50s and it wasn't quite women travelling alone, and she gets a lady called Enid who comes along for the ride, and there's an awful lot that happens around both those characters. So Enid, and I shall read you just a tiny little bit that I have marked.
I can't wait. You've sold it to me.
So the lady who, Miss Benson, has advertised in the paper, because that's how you used to advertise in the 50s, for a companion. And she says, 4 people replied to her advert: a widow, a retired teacher, a demobbed soldier, and a woman called Enid Pretty. Enid Pretty has spilt tea over her letter, and it wasn't really a letter, it was more of a shopping list. And while her spelling was also verging on disaster, Enid wanted to live life and see the world, completely misspelt. After that, she had put carrots, onions, and a few other things that she needed, including eggs and string. Marjorie wrote to all of them except Enid to ask them to come for an interview. But of course, things happen, and Enid is the one that ends up going with her. It is a very funny book. It is also quite a moving book as well. So I thought I would just throw that one in, just as a wee sneaky one.
I think it's a perfect segue into our next theme, because Miss Benson and Enid don't sound like they'd make the perfect fit, really. You could even say they're strange bedfellows.
Oh!
Which is our theme for next time. I think Good Omens would also really qualify as a strange bedfellows theme, because an angel and demon, they're friends. I should have said they're like really good friends. They're on the same team. They're not on the team of big team angel, big team demon. They're doing their own thing on the side. And they'd be like, they're strange bedfellows, but they work. And the Witchfinder and the Witch also team up, and they're strange bedfellows, and they work. So what we'd love to do is, if you have ideas for a book that you'd like to recommend to us, either with Here Comes the Sun or with Strange Bedfellows, we'd love your recommendations, because we love being recommended.
Absolutely. And if you have a theme that you think that B might be interested in challenging us with, we'd be more than happy to hear about that as well.
Absolutely. We love finding ways to make it not quite fit, but somehow fit.
Yes, absolutely.
So you've been listening to Bees Books. Thanks very much for listening to the first segment, first episode, first whatchamacallit.
We like that word, yeah. And hopefully you'll be here for our second one that will be in a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
So you've heard the first episode of Bees Books, guys, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Jennie and Pari will be back in the weeks in between our regular podcast to tell you a little bit more about book recommendations based on the theme supplied by B, the bonsai tree. And I hope you enjoy listening to those. They are very fun, and Jennie and Pari are fantastic to listen to. They are very, very funny talking together, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Looking forward, you can watch this space for a very exciting competition coming your way from North Lanarkshire Libraries. We will be launching a photography competition during the summer, and the competition is to take some photos of nice places or scenes round about North Lanarkshire, and we'll put them together into a photo ebook, which we will launch on BorrowBox later in the year. So it's not launched yet. Do watch out for that on our social media when it hits, and take part if you enjoy taking some photos. But that's all for now, guys, from us. And you can leave us a little bit of feedback on our podcast if you've enjoyed this one, using the hashtag FLB podcast, or by using the email address librarypodcast@northland.gov.uk and drop us a wee email. But that's all for now, guys. We will be back again soon with another episode, and also watch out for Bees Books episodes in between. Bye for now.